Yeah.
You continue.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. As has been mentioned already, sir, the issue of enforced disappearances of persons suddenly disappearing in this country has existed for a long, long time. We are aware that during the JVP insurrection in the 70s and the late 80s, this happened and several tens of thousands of youth disappeared. As a matter of fact, Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was then an opposition member of parliament, on behalf of those people, even went to Geneva, to the UN, with documents to explain what was happening to the international community in regard to people in this country. So this is a matter, sir, which has been going on for a long time, and we had a war for several decades. It came to an end in 2009. Both during the war and after the war came to an end. There has been a very widespread complaint by people in this country, particularly from the north and the east. There are a large number of citizens who are Tamils have disappeared. And you are aware, sir, that over the past several years, these people who are the next of kin of the disappeared persons have been demonstrating and demanding that they be made aware of what happened to their next of kin, many of whom were surrendered by them to the authorities, whether it be the police or the army. And I think it's a very legitimate demand which must be addressed. And the Sri Lankan government is is moving to enact a law to bring into operation the International Convention pertaining to enforced disappearances and prescribing the several offences that can be committed, or have been committed, or can be committed in the future under that law. There are a few points I want to make in regard to the overall situation relating to this matter. There seems to be an impression sought to be created by some people in this country that the international community is interfering somewhat unnecessarily in the affairs of this country, and that is not acceptable. That must be terminated, and that such action on the part of the international community impinges on the sovereignty of this country. We all want the sovereignty of our country protected. There can be no question about that. But when you talk in terms of sovereignty, it has certain definitions. It does not mean the freedom of the wild airs, that in the name of sovereignty you can do whatever you like, violate all international conventions, violate international treaties, violate commitments made by you to the international community, and say that we are sovereign, we can do what we like, and nobody else can talk about what we do. That is not acceptable, sir. That is not in keeping with either domestic law or international law, and it's something which is outrageous in my respectful submission. Even beyond that, an effort is sometimes made to make out that the international community is supportive of the LTTE and is against the Sri Lankan armed forces. I think nothing can be further from the truth, sir. We all know that the LTTE was engaged in a war. They had reasons good or bad, or both good and bad, for the commencement of the war. They fought the war for a long period of time, for over 30 years. They gave the Sri Lankan state a real run. There is no question about that. Eventually they were defeated. But what must be remembered is that the international community, particularly countries like India, completely backed the Sri Lankan government, the Sri Lankan state, in regard to the conduct of the war against the LTTE. LTTE was banned in all those countries. LTTE's efforts to muster support for the war in that country in various ways was hindered, impeded, and prevented. Many countries gave you vital intelligence in regard to various activities of the LTTE, particularly the movement of arms. You worked in close collaboration with countries like India, which supported you completely to eradicate the LTTE, because they felt that you made out that the LTTE was a hindrance to political resolution. That if the LTTE was eliminated, there would be a resolution politically, not militarily. And those countries supported you in the belief that you will keep your commitment. But the fact of the matter is that up to date, though 9 years have lapsed since the end of the war, and though it's almost 2.5 years since the present government came into power, we have not yet, though we do concede that there has been some movement towards a political resolution, we have not yet been able to achieve a political solution, a political resolution of the conflict, despite the commitments made by the previous government to the international community, particularly to India, to the Secretary General of the UN, and the commitment made by even the present government to the international community. There has been no final resolution, political resolution of the conflict yet. You must not forget, sir, that you were able to win the war primarily because of the support you received from the international community. That cannot be denied. I wish to make this point, sir, because this misperception and misrepresentation that the international community is seeking to punish Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka defeated the LTTE must not prevail in this country. And if that impression continues to prevail in this country, that would not be helpful towards movement in the right direction, towards bringing about a political resolution of the conflict. Having said that, sir, I want to make a few comments in regard to, I'm sorry I was not here for the whole of the Minister's speech, Honourable Minister's speech. I came only towards the very end of it. But I heard it said that the Minister very clearly stated that this law would apply only to the future and not in regard to what happened in the past. I do not know why that should be so, sir. Nobody is targeting anyone in particular. The Sri Lankan forces, security forces, fought the war on behalf of the Sri Lankan government. They were engaged in a war in keeping with the policy of the Sri Lankan government to be engaged in that war to eradicate the LTTE. They were carrying out the directions of the government. I don't think they committed any offense whatever in their war against LTTE. But beyond that, if the members of the security forces have been guilty of excesses against unarmed civilians, given against unarmed combatants, if they have disappeared after they were surrendered to the Sri Lankan security forces, I don't think that can be put on the same basis as the Sri Lankan forces who were engaged legitimately in the conduct of a war as per the policy decisions of the state. There must be a distinction drawn between the actions of the Sri Lankan security forces in pursuit of a policy enunciated by the government, in pursuit of decisions made by the state, and excesses committed by them against unarmed civilians or even unarmed combatants. What the law seeks to deal with is, and it is a responsibility of the state which cannot be denied, the law seeks to deal with such actions, not actions pertaining to the war in which these forces were engaged in accordance with the policy of the government. But if they went beyond that and they took into custody civilians, unarmed civilians, took into custody unarmed combatants, or such persons surrendered to them, and if they have been done away with, if they were female, if they have been raped and killed, that must be dealt with. There can be no question about that. And such crimes must be prosecuted, because if you don't prosecute those crimes, is it your position that you are not prosecuting such crimes for the reason that such crimes were committed either explicitly or impliedly with your sanction? If you are not prepared to prosecute them, it would mean that you sanction or approve either implicitly or explicitly the commission of such crimes by such people. I don't think so that's acceptable. There must be a clear distinction drawn between the conduct of the war by the security forces in keeping with the policy of the state and the excesses committed by the security forces pertaining to unarmed Tamil civilians and unarmed combatants. Therefore, sir, I think while on the whole the law fills a vacuum that has existed in our legal system for quite some time, the government must ensure that the law is applied in such a way that the victims of such acts on the part of whomever are satisfied that the laws of this country are applicable to what happened to the actual next of kin, and that those persons are dealt with. I would, with those submissions, sir, conclude my speech. But I do think that it is a duty of the government to rethink this whole question of the law being made applicable only to the future and not to the past. Sri Lanka is facing enough problems on the international front on the question of violations of human rights laws, international humanitarian laws, accountability, truth, justice. And I do not think we should be seen to be dodging or not facing up to situations that we have to face up to. I think the government should rethink their decision in regard to this matter.